So yeah, I'm having a lot of trouble getting this video made in between having Bill Webb call me in the middle of it and recording one of them without a microphone. This is I am Matt Finch, and this is the second video in the series about what is the Open Game License and how do you use it. The first video covered the 4 foundational building blocks of the OGL, which are the Open Game License itself, the System Reference Document, and the 2 main categories of intellectual property that are created by that license, which are Open Game Content and Product Identity. And so if you've watched the first video, you'll have the basics on that. I suggest you watch the first video. In case you don't, let me give a very quick legal disclaimer at the beginning, which is that although I'm an attorney, I'm not your attorney, and I'm not a practicing attorney. What that means is that I'm discussing generalities here and assisting somebody with understanding the license. But if you have a question, you need to consult your own attorney. You can't legally rely on what's in this video, either in terms of what I say or in terms of what Wizards of the Coast said in the contract, which speaks for itself. I'm not affiliated with Wizards of the Coast, so this is not any sort of official interpretation of the OGL. And licenses and laws can change. So if this turns out to be a timeless work for the ages, you need to look at when it was uploaded in 2017. And if it's years later, you need to verify that the things that I'm saying here continue to be true in the legal context where you're listening to it, future person. We're going to talk here about Section 1, beginning at the start, but when you're reading a contract, you generally skip the definitions section, begin reading the contract. Definitions are like a variable that you plug into the sentences later on, and they're done so that they don't have to be repeated every single time that they show up in a contract. So they make it easier to read, but reading the definitions without context is almost impossible to assimilate what you're reading. I will go through a brief description of what the definitions are, but these are not the definitions. The definitions are what's in the contract. So this is very much just a guideline to help you as we're cruising through the rest of the sections in the contract. The first one is contributors, and contributors, that's anybody who has created open game content that you're using. And that includes you, because you may be creating open game content that's being used. It's easy to run into troubles reading this contract if you're thinking of contributors as being other people and you being you, since you is a defined term in here. Contributors is a catch-all for anybody. The next one is derivative material, and derivative material is a legal term. And here what we're talking about is any material that is protected by somebody else's copyright. And now that can include something that is protected by their copyright but has also been put into open game content, because you can have both of those two things exist at the same time. We move on to distribute. Distribute just means to publish, including publishing to a single person. And it does not matter whether you're talking about publishing it or distributing it for free or for profit. There is no distinction. I mentioned that in the prior video. Copyright law does not make a distinction between those two. Open game content is a defined term. We're going to go into that in considerable depth later on, but in terms of the definition here, it's the material that you can use under the contract that is coming from other people, that always includes game mechanics that are included in the system reference document. There's also mention of enhancement over prior art. That's basically, it's technical. It carves out pre-existing copyrighted material from the definition of open game content, which as they go on, that means you can't use. If somebody has just copied a big old section of Lord of the Rings, it means you can't use it. Later in the contract, we'll see a part that says that you can't do that yourself. You can't be the person who starts that chain. The next one is product identity, and product identity is a vast definition. The way it operates, even though it is not stated as the default in a situation where you don't know what's open content, but it is so broad that it is going to cover an enormous amount of what's in the document, probably everything except what's required to be open game content. We'll go into that in a bit more detail. There's the definition of a trademark. That is material that's used by a company to identify itself. And in the terms of the contract, that does not require that it be an actual trademark. It's simply material that the company uses to identify itself. And so that's an area where the contract spreads one of the legal terms out a little bit. We talk about the term use in the contract. That one is unclear. They just say use. Use means to use. And what is done in that legal definition specifically is that they are bringing in the fact that it's only open game content that they're talking about when they use that defined term. And that can be significant. Specifically, it means to distribute or derive material from open game content. In this walkthrough, I'm not going to get into that level of specificity. I don't want to go there, and the reason being that it depends so much on the individual facts of a situation that there is anything I could say would pretty much be misleading. So I'm not going to go into that. But if that's the situation you end up in, be taking a careful look, at that definition. We end up with you, and that's pretty obvious, but it just distinguishes you as an individual from your role as a contributor. So that's the basic nutshell of what's in there. We are going to go back to the definition of product identity a little bit later, but let's move on for the moment to Section 2, which is titled The License. This section basically requires two things. One is that you include a specific notice that your work is being made in compliance with this license. Many people forget to do this. What it means is you take the appropriate sentence from Section 2, you copy and paste it as a separate item at the beginning, usually at the beginning of your legal appendix. It's usually the first sentence. This is produced under the version 1.0A of the license. And so that's something that very many people forget. We'll probably get to that because I think at the end of this we're going to do a summary of what your work should look like, at least in terms of the highlights and the frequent mistakes. That's one of them. You got to take the language from this section, put it separately up at the top of your legal appendix. The other thing that's required in Section 2 is that you can't add any extra restrictions on something that you are releasing as open game content. You can do that with some of your product identity, but not with your open game content. So you have basically got, in open game content, it's under these rules. You can't put any other restrictions on it. You can't say something like, you need to include my name in the title or anything like that. You can't do it. With product identity, you can, and what you occasionally see in legal appendices, especially of games like retroclones and so on and so forth, is that you are allowed to use some of the product identity under certain circumstances. And usually that has to do with mentioning compatibility with the product, and we'll probably go into that a little bit later in the discussion. So that's Section 2. In summary, you have to include the specific notice, and you can't add any extra restrictions to open gaming content other than what's in the license. Section 3 is, you might almost call it a legal formality, but it's actually extremely important because it's simply the trigger words that establish the fact that a contract is being made here, that there is offer and acceptance. And then in Section 4 is the last little piece of establishing a contract, which is consideration. That's mentioned that the trigger for consideration in the contract is simply the fact that you're using the license. That's consideration on your side. And then on the other hand, what is it that Wizards of the Coast is allowing you to do in terms of the license that you're getting? They're defining the details of the license here. What they describe in Section 4 in terms of what you get is a perpetual, worldwide, royalty-free, non-exclusive license, and then there is the specific term that it's within, as long as you're within the terms of the contract. because your license can evaporate if you have not used the open game license correctly. So let's run through those terms in order as they appear. A perpetual license means that it can't be canceled except if you were outside the exact terms of the license. But given that you're within the exact terms of the license, there is no circumstance under which Wizards of the Coast can simply say, okay, all game content, you can't use it. You can't use the SRD anymore. They're not allowed to do that under their obligations under the contract. It also says that it's worldwide. A lot of licenses will specify specific countries. In this case, it's worldwide. That one's easy. It's royalty free. You don't have to send any money to Wizards of the Coast in consideration for using the contract. It's free. And then it says that it is non-exclusive. And that one simply means that you can't, if you're the first person to use the SRD, then nobody else can. Everybody's allowed to use it. That's what non-exclusive means. Now, we've hit basically the 11-minute mark on this video, and I don't want to create a long video because if I do, it's going to be a little bit hard if somebody wants to pinpoint where I'm talking about something. And so I'm going to do this in blocks, probably about 4 sections long. Since I've just finished section 4, the next video is going to pick it up with section 5. And so I will go ahead and end this one as I normally say imagine the hell out of it, and in the legal ones I am not, because imagining the hell out of it with a legal document is a really bad idea. And so once again, I'm Matt Finch. Please subscribe to the channel. That helps me, and it will let you know when the sequels to this video come out, because presumably it'll let you know if you've got your YouTube set up that way. So please subscribe to the channel. Please like it if you see it on Facebook. Make a comment if you have a question. Some of those questions I'm not going to answer because they fall outside of the disclaimer that I made. But please do, if you have questions, put them in, and I may answer those questions, try to answer them in later videos. So thanks very much for watching. I'm Matt Finch, and I will see you in the third section of this series.